Hello and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today I'll be showing you how to cycle from Woolwich in southeast London to Eltham. This ride takes about 25 minutes and you can do more or less the whole thing on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes. By public transport, the same journey takes around half an hour, so you might even be able to save a little bit of time by getting on your bike. If you find this video useful or you just enjoy watching it, then please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as I try to post new videos just like it every week. I'd also like to say a massive thank you to everybody who supports the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to contribute as well, you can find a link in the description below the video. Alright, let's get going. So we're starting outside the big Tesco in Woolwich town centre, and we're going to head down this nice little path called Love Lane. We then use this helpful cut in the central reservation to get onto Anglesey Road and turn right up Brookhill Road. This is the start of a signposted TfL route called Cycleway 33, as you can see from the green and blue sign on the left there, and C33 written on the ground. C33 is mostly a backstreet route on quiet roads, as well as a few paths. Some bits are quite good and other bits are definitely in need of improvement, and I'll point those out as we go, because for the first section of this route we're going to be following C33, as it is, I think, the best way to go south out of Woolwich town centre. After C33 is done, I then cobbled together a reasonably quiet route of my own, which will take us to Eltham station. In terms of being low traffic, C33 is pretty good. With the exception of the very first bit of Brookmill Road, it's actually almost entirely on streets that have no through traffic. That means that you're unlikely to run into any cars, or at least cars which are moving, because the big downside of C33 is that the streets it goes on are absolutely dominated by on-street parking. You can see here there's a parking space blocking the entrance to the path, and further on we'll see similar such examples. From our point of view, that means that the carriageway can be quite narrow, you'll have to negotiate past parked vehicles in a lot of cases, and also sight lines can be blocked by particularly large cars when they're parked, so you just need to keep an eye out when you're on streets like that. The other area which C33 could do with a bit of improvement on is really just the state of the paths. You can see this one is all cracked up, as is this little street here. It's really just a case of basic maintenance and resurfacing, which would make the whole thing a lot smoother and just more pleasant to ride on. Just look at the floor on this little pathway coming up here. It's about 2/3 covered by different patching jobs. When you get to that point, you do think you might just want to resurface the whole thing. This area is a really good example of somewhere which could do with a controlled parking zone. There really are just cars spilling out onto every pavement, every surface, blocking drop curbs and such like that. If you look closely on the right, the actual parking spaces are largely empty, but people have parked on the street, including blocking the cycleway. Presumably it's more convenient for them than having to back into a proper space, but it really does make the experience of cycling down here a lot less pleasant than it could be. The strange thing is that if you look on the census map of the areas we just cycled through, a full 55% of households actually don't have a car. So something is wrong with the way that parking has been managed there, and it's even possible that people are coming from outside and leaving cars there. Now we are going to cross into Woolwich Common, which has a really interesting history. Probably the most interesting fact that I came across is that from 1803 to 1873, the common was actually used for artillery target practice. Fortunately, that's not the case anymore, so you are fine to cycle down here. It was also heavily bombed during the Second World War, as an anti-aircraft battery was located here. From a cycling point of view, the path is nice and wide and nice and smooth, and the common is open 24 hours, so you can come down here at any time, but I should point out that there are no street lights along the path, so just be aware that it could be quite dark if you come down here. Now that's actually the end of C33, so I'm going to ad-lib the route from now on. We're starting off going down Stadium Road. Now Stadium Road isn't a super quiet street, but it effectively acts as an access road for the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. As you can see, it's not too busy, despite technically being a through route. I think that's because the vast majority of north-south long-distance traffic tends to stay on the A205, which runs really parallel to this. It's not ideal, and it would be great to have a cycle path running alongside it, even if it was just a decent shared pavement. Maybe on the left-hand side where there aren't really any side roads. But for now it will do, and it is a useful connector and probably the best way to go if you need to get to Eltham. Now, while we were on Cycleway 33, there was helpful wayfinding, signs and C33 written on the ground with a cycle symbol. Now we're off it. If you want to follow this route, there won't be any of that. So if you need a bit of extra help to show you which way to go, then you can find a map of the route linked in the description below. It's in a GPX file and it should work on whatever app or device you choose to use. Now, I want to get to Corelli Road, which is actually on the other side of Shooters Hill Road, but the junction that led to it, I didn't really fancy it. Probably not the sort of way that I would send in video. So I've got kind of a weird way of getting there for this, which I think is easier, but still not great. So we're going to go on this diagonal path here, and we're going to go in the painted cycle lane on Shooters Hill Road. Not a great cycle lane, but it is a mandatory cycle lane. It's fairly wide. People seem to be giving it plenty of space. You're on it for a couple of seconds, then wait for a gap in the traffic in the cycle lane, and then you can turn into Corelli Road. Not ideal at all, to be honest. It would be great to have some sort of crossing to help you over the road there, but in the meantime, that's how I decided to do it. This middle third of the route is on reasonably quiet back streets. As you can see, they're residential streets without huge amounts of traffic on them. They're relatively wide, so there's plenty of space to pass cars, and I think it's a fairly comfortable riding experience. That said, this street does get a little bit busier at peak time, particularly around the school entrance. So if you're commuting through here, just bear that in mind. Some of the streets are better than others, so Corelli Road here is a through route, as is Broadwalk, which we're on now. But we're turning into Mayday Gardens now, and this is actually a closed loop, so it doesn't have any through traffic on it at any time of day. There's simply no reason for anyone to drive down here unless they live here or are visiting someone who lives here. We're actually heading for a little path right at the back of the cul-de-sac, and that means that although it's a dead end for cars, it's not a dead end for cycling. You are allowed to cycle on it. You can see the little blue shared space sign on the lamppost as you enter, but unfortunately it hasn't really been designed for cycling. There are 3 separate chicanes like this along the path, which is not a great experience and particularly difficult if you've got accessibility issues. Maybe you're using a trike or a recumbent bike. It could be very difficult to get past there. Chicanes like that are also no fun if you're on foot. They create pinch points with people coming in the opposite direction, and if you're pushing a buggy or similar, they're just something else that you've got to manoeuvre around. So yeah, removing those is a cheap way to improve the path. On the plus side, cycling on the streets around here is really nice. Again, they are mostly a dead end for cars, so most people have no reason to drive down here. There's also a lot less on-street parking than we saw in those earlier streets on the route, which just means we have more space to pass, fewer potential hazards, and better, safer lines of sight. The difference is really noticeable, and cycling down here is really an enjoyable experience. Although one change I would make would be to put some double yellow lines on the approach to the junction here, as those cars did block the view of the intersection. Just a reminder that if you want to support the channel's work and you're feeling generous, then you can always chuck us a couple of quid on Patreon. There's a link in the description below the video, and I should say thank you so much again to everyone who already subscribes on that. I really appreciate it, and it really does help keep the channel going. We're getting pretty close to Eltham now, and the final run into the station is really quite good. Brisset Road, which we're just about to turn onto, is nice and quiet and gives us a great direct route all the way to the South Circular, where we're going to join a reasonably decent shared crossing. That will then put us onto a path which will take us directly to the station. Now, this is far from the worst crossing of a major road that I've ever used in London. It does at least have quite a large waiting area here, and the approach from Brisset Road is quite nicely done with a dropped curb. Unfortunately, it does have quite a long wait to get across the main road there, which is something the video doesn't show, as I always cut the waits out. We then find ourselves on this path running opposite this playing field. Now, if you look at the ground here, you'll see something that is quite annoying, which is that a whole 1/3 of the width is actually taken up with overgrown vegetation. The path could be a lot more comfortable if someone just came along and cleared it occasionally. In terms of safety, that path does lack its own street lights. Now, I've not been down there at night, but I have a feeling from the location of the street lights on the main road to our right that it probably is lit up by those lights. This section of Edith Nesbit Walk does also have its own streetlights, so I think it should probably be okay as a night route. If anyone has any experience of cycling along there after dark, do let me know in the comments because I'm interested. Now, as you can see from the sign under the railway bridge, we have found ourselves in Eltham. It's not quite Eltham town centre, it's actually Eltham station, but if it's good enough for the railways, then it's good enough for me. Now, if you review the map of the route which we've just gone on, you'll notice that we basically just shadowed the A205, but keeping away from traffic, mostly. In summary of the route, I'd say that the first bit on C33 is pretty decent, although I did point out the issues with the parking and the state of repair of the paths, and the last bit is also really pleasant once you get into Mayday Gardens and Brisset Road. Unfortunately, the middle probably is the worst bit. Stadium Road could be a lot quieter, and that crossing of Shooters Hill Road is far from ideal. Overall, if this was my commute, I'd be very happy to ride it every day, although I would be asking, why can't we just have protected cycle lanes on the A205? Let me know in the comments what you think, make sure you hit the like button so other people see the video, and subscribe if you haven't already. And a massive thanks again to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon. I'll see you all again next time.